Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling, and this is a very special episode, not just because I'm not filming where I normally film, but I've got a guest on today I've never had on before. This is Josh Weaver from Fans in Motion, which is a Night Ranger podcast. One of my favorite melodic rock bands ever, and a band that I rarely get to talk about. So I've been following Fans in Motion on Instagram for a long time. Started watching some YouTube videos, and I thought I got to get some of these guys on here because they know their stuff when it comes to this band. So yeah, definitely check it out. It's all one word, Fans in Motion. Hopefully you know where that title comes from. I certainly do. Josh, welcome to Tim's Final Confessions, and thank you for taking a little time out to talk to me today.
No problem. Thank you for having me, and congratulations on 400 episodes you just reached not too long ago, right?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm not really sure how it happened either, but I just keep on going, talking about the music I love. So
yeah, we just reached 100 episodes, and we're just Night Ranger based. And to get to 100 episodes talking about Night Ranger is truly a feat. But to get to 400 episodes talking about just hard rock music in general, congratulations. And you're in Canada, right?
Yeah, I'm in Eastern Canada. I'm in the province of New Brunswick. We're probably about, from here, it's probably like a 45-minute drive from the border of Maine. I grew up in this area. So I grew up right on the border. So I made a lot of music, a lot of music purchases south of the border too, which is, it's interesting because, Canada's not a country that, Night Ranger were never, for whatever reason, they've never come anywhere close to here that I know of, or if it was, it was years ago, and I think that their only successful album up here was Midnight Madness. I think that was a gold record up here, but yeah, I think it's because I did grow up on the border that I became aware of them. So whereabouts are you located?
I'm basically Columbus, Ohio, but
okay.
But don't feel bad. I don't think a lot of Canadians go where you're at either. But
no, they don't. It's true. It's true. Yeah.
But I did wear in honor of this episode my Pete Rose Montreal Expos jersey for you.
Oh yeah, that's old school. Yeah.
Canada hasn't been the same since the Expos left, so that probably is part of the reason why Night Ranger's not going there. But yeah, I'm glad you found us on the Instagram, even though you need to find us on Facebook. That's where all the action is.
Yeah, you mentioned that a lot in some of your episodes. And I wanted to say, your podcast is obviously, Night Ranger centric, but you have branched out and talked to people on the peripheral. And one of my favorite episodes, and I was hook, line, and sinker, you talked to a member of one of my all-time favorite bands, Y&T. You talked to the one and only John Nyman. When I saw that, I had to, reeled me right in. I had to watch that one right away. What a great storyteller John is.
Oh, John's the best. Always been a big Y&T fan, and I got John's solo record, Made in America, and
just my dog. Don't mind the noise.
It's all right. It's all right. And that Made in America record that he released just surprised me how good it was. But he's a Bay Area guy, came up, in the same clubs as Night Ranger did. So I was like, so I brought him on, and he was able to tell some of those stories, both of them releasing where he's with the Eric Martin band, Eric Martin and Mr. Big. And it was a great story. I don't know how much you listened to it, but where he's talking about.
I listened to the whole thing, how he became got into building greenhouses and that was fascinating because there's even stuff that I wasn't really sure about timeline. I knew that his association with Y&T went back, to the mid '80s, and he didn't talk about it, but he's the one that put the robot outfit on, in Rock We Trust, and would lumber out there on stage. But he was a perfect fit for the band when Joey Alves had left and then Steph Burns had left. So, that's a band that I preach to people all the time, and people, I've never heard of them. I said, if you love melodic hard rock, you got to check these guys out. And a similar vein, even though Night Ranger were, much more successful. I'm all about telling people there's more to these bands than the one or two songs there's more to Night Ranger than Sister Christian. There's more to Kansas than Wayward Son and Dust in the Wind. There's more to Y&T than Summertime Girls. There's more to Aldo Nova than Fantasy. Like, you dig deeper. And this is, you've had Joel Hoekstra, Eric Levy, members that have come, and the man himself, Kelly Kagi. I mean, that was a great interview because a lot of this stuff about the formation of Night Ranger, I didn't know. I mean, to me, they just kind of appeared on the radar as this fully formed, like, you listen to Dawn Patrol, that doesn't sound like a debut album. You can tell that these guys were vets, and there's no quirks and there's none of those idiosyncrasies that some bands, when they're really young and they put a first album out, that you listen back on and go, ha ha ha, that was fun when they did that. Definitely. These guys just had it together. And they came on my radar, probably like they came on most folks' radar, but I'm curious, how did you become a fan, and when did you become a fan?
Well, now I'm younger than most people who, probably are lifelong Night Ranger fans, born in 77. But I was always into music real young. And I remember watching MTV as a small kid. And remember my aunt came in and she, one night I was probably watching cartoons or something. And she's like, you got to listen to this new band. She had Midnight Madness and Dawn Patrol. And I probably told her, leave me alone, I'm watching cartoons. But the next day I went in her bedroom and I grabbed those two records, started listening to it. And I was probably 5-6 years old. This would have been about 83, probably 84. And I was just like, what the hell is this? Like, this isn't what's on MTV that I'm watching, Madonna and Kaja Gugu and all that stuff. So that became the music I liked. And my band, when I just turned 8, they were playing the Ohio State Fair, back then it was a big kind of like outdoor festival thing. And I had my grandma take me up to go see the Seven Wishes tour.
Awesome.
And so from there, just as I got older, I remember I got Man in Motion for Easter or something like that, and I followed them all through the early 90s. Well, I had my aunt take me to go see Damn Yankees when I was 13, and when I got my license, I was able to go see him with Gary Moon. And
I was going to ask you about that, about because that's another interesting period. But so when you became a fan, you stayed. You were just there all the way through all of those changes, through the hiatus, the Reformation, and all the band member changes.
Yeah, they've been pretty much my favorite band since '83. There's other bands obviously I enjoy and collect, but Night Ranger has been, and I got to meet them all through the 90s and early 2000s and all that stuff. I remember Kelly gave me an all access pass back in 1995 because we were going to all those Mojo shows, and so I'd met them and got stuff signed. And it's just how I got into it. They kept releasing good records and performing live very well. One of the best live bands even today, and that's how I got hooked, so to say.
Yeah, that's cool. I have got two. When I think of how I first heard of Night Ranger, I'm only 3 years older than you, so we're pretty close in age, or my wife's age. So I was born in '74, but I remember, I'm thinking it was summer of '84. There's two things, and they're both related to Midnight Madness. But I remember it was summertime, but we were in a school playground. They had a big playground, a big slide. And I don't know if it must have been one of my older cousins had like a boom box and had the radio on. And I remember, the Motorin song, right? I didn't know what it was called. I knew I liked it. I didn't know, what it was called, who sang it. I just knew I liked that song. And I would hear that song once in a while. And right around 84, 85, that's when I really started listening to the top 40 radio and trying to figure out who sings what songs. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was a lifelong, taking the music minutia in, right? But the other thing I remember, and maybe, people that follow your channel will know the answer to this, because nobody I've talked to remembers this. But music videos weren't something that were on all the time where I lived. You know, up in Canada, we've got Much Music, which is the equivalent of MTV. It went on the air in 1984, but where I lived, we didn't get it till early 86. So any show that showed music videos, I was all in. Almost didn't matter what videos they were playing. And I remember around that same time, summer 84-ish, it was on PBS, believe it or not, on public broadcasting, Sesame Street channel. It was like a Saturday afternoon. I was turning the channels and I looked this up because I had to Google it to make sure I wasn't imagining it, but it was a show called Color Sounds. And they played either a half hour or an hour of music videos. And they were like lyric videos now because they'd have the words to the songs at the bottom of the screen. And there was always a theme to each show, whether certain vowel sounds, whatever it was. I remember seeing this bunch of videos. And one of the videos was You Can Still Rock in America. And I don't know if I knew then that was the same band that did Sister Christian, but I liked that song too. Point is, by the time that, late spring, early summer 1985 came around, when this little tune came out, I was definitely there. I knew I liked this band, right? That having heard 3 songs by them. Sentimental Street to me is, if aliens were to land on Earth and say, give me a good example of a melodic rock song, that's how you do it.
And a lot of people don't know that's the first question aliens usually ask.
It is. Yeah. But the funny thing is that I didn't actually own anything by Night Ranger until late 89, like the fall of 89. I distinctly remember I found a yard sale and they were selling cassette tapes. Now at this time, I'm 15 years old. I'm making an allowance, right? I don't have money. I've started to buy a music collection, buy cassettes, but had to pick and choose when I did have enough money to buy one. And they had a bunch of cassettes on sale for $2 each. And I was like, I wasn't seeing anything I liked. And like, geez, $2 for a cassette. I should, it'd really be cool if I found something. And they had 7 Wishes. And I was like, oh yeah, I'd kind of forgotten about Night Ranger, to be quite honest with you. I said, oh yeah, I remember that. And I looked at this, okay, it's got Goodbye, it's got 4 in the Morning to Sentimental Street. And so what the heck, it's $2, I bought it. And the other thing I remember is that for some reason it was rewound to side 2. So I just put it in my Walkman. The first thing I heard was This Boy Needs to Rock. I'm like, okay, that's cool. So by the time I revisited those songs that I hadn't heard in 3 or 4 years, I'm like, okay, I gotta fill out the rest of this collection. Wasn't too long after that, I found Big Life. But I would say, no word of a lie, within a week, I was reading, it wasn't the TV guide. It was like the TV listings that came in your paper, your Friday newspaper, right? And there was a little entertainment article, and it said something about this new band forming called Damn Yankees. With Ted Nugent and Tommy Shaw, and then Jack Blades from Night Ranger. And it said something about the recently disbanded Night Ranger. And I said, well, that figures. I get into a band and they break up. Same thing happened with Y&T. I got into Y&T in 1990 and they played their farewell shows at the end of that year. Now, of course, we know they reunited, but yeah. And I got the greatest hits that year for Christmas, and I played that Night Ranger's greatest hits. It just became one of those bands. It's like they make the music the type of music that I like to listen to. And they've never, I don't think, ever toured Eastern Canada. And I don't even think, I know they've played in Maine, but it's been a good long time. And it's probably before I started going to shows or had access to go to shows, which is too bad. I really wish that some of these bills, that you guys get down there all the time would make their way up to Canada. But for whatever reason, there just doesn't seem to be the demand, even though, I see plenty of their, the back catalog used. But for some reason, they're just, that's why I like to spread a little bit of awareness, because people know Sister Christian. I mean, there's no question, it gets radio play up here, but, there's just so much more to this band, and the music they've been making since they reformed is all really good. I mean, a couple of years ago, my nephew Will and I, we reviewed ATBPO. And we both thought, yeah, this is good. Like they've been on a pretty consistent streak since they got back together. And I actually really, really liked, I'm glad you mentioned it. because no one, it's one thing, nobody talks about Night Ranger, but no one ever talks about feeding off the mojo. And I remember reading about this in Metal Edge, and like I had no idea. I knew that that Brad and Kelly had reformed a version of Night Ranger, but I didn't know they'd made any recordings. So I went and found this, and I played this all the time.
It's a good record. And people either like it, or if they don't, it's just because usually, they had no interest in it because Jack's not on there. But it's a good melodic record. Last Chance is one of the best songs.
Oh yeah,
under the Night Ranger banner. It's a good record all the way through. The cover of Peter Frampton's on there, and Kelly's.
The band themselves don't even count it because 7 comes out, and that should have been called 8.
I don't think it's the band, but it might be one person. But but yes, you got the album 7, which should have been titled 8, but that's water under the bridge, I guess.
But I've described it to people. It's like, well, basically the songs, like Gary reminds me of a little bit of Tom Kiefer, and I like Cinderella, so I didn't have a problem with that. I said, basically, it's a good album. I kind of compare it to the Motley Crue album with John Corabi. Okay, maybe not all the songs sound like the band that's listed on here, but it's a good album. But on this one, it's like half and half. The songs that Kelly sing, they sound like Night Ranger. Precious Time. Wow, that's a Tell Me I'm Wrong. Like there's good songs, but the songs that Gary sing don't necessarily sound like Night Ranger. But that's you can never have enough good melodic rock, right? And to have some new stuff. I remember I was all into it. Now, mind you, I was even more excited when this came out because I was like, wow, they're back on a major label. Hopefully something will happen. And well, it didn't, but that's how it's go.
And timeline's everything. Going back to Mojo, that is recorded and released at the height of grunge.
Oh yeah.
So these bands aren't really, Night Ranger is wanting to focus on being a power trio. And that's why you don't really get a lot of, some of that Night Ranger sound is because they were wanting to get away from that, because that was the farthest thing that was in. So they were trying to make it a little bit heavier. They still kept it melodic, but it was just they were looking to do something different. And then Neverland, I think when that came out, it's a good record. I enjoyed it. I think on our podcast we ranked it. We ranked all our favorite Night Ranger albums. I think that was in my top 5. The only thing I always got was they always talked about hated being labeled a ballad band. And the first track is like one of the slowest ballads that they've ever recorded. So, which in Japan, that album was released a few months earlier, maybe 6 months earlier in Japan, and it's got an entirely different running order, which actually fits a little bit better. But yeah, both of those are great albums.
Yeah, I bought that when it, as soon as I, was aware that it was out, and I thought, oh, all right, I get it. They want people to hear something familiar, and I thought it was a good song. I actually do remember hearing it on the radio a couple of times, but unfortunately, it, within a year they're on CMC, and then comes that period which you guys have talked about, the 10 years of no new Night Ranger, and the Jeff Watson story, and then Fitz going. But one of my favorite episodes that you did was the about the, I won't say mythical because it exists, but the unreleased third Damn Yankees album. I knew a little bit about that story, but I don't think I knew quite as much. I didn't know Luke Eben was the guy that mixed it. I didn't know exactly which songs. I knew some of the songs made it onto the various recordings, but that was really, really in depth. I didn't know it had a barcode, serial number. Like it was so close to coming out. And I remember reading about that because I was all in when John Kolodner revived Portrait Records. I'm like, all right, these guys have a shot again. I got the Great White and I got the Rat. And ironically, I think Jack's got songs or co-writes on both of those albums. So I was all, new Damn Yankees album. Sure, why not? And it's interesting to think about because with that Luke Eben, that quote unquote modern production, they could have had a surprise comeback hit the way Bon Jovi did with It's My Life. I mean,
Possible.
I mean, that would have thrown the Night Ranger timeline off if Dan Yankees all of a sudden were a big band again. But because I remember, when they first came out, like I said, I'd read about them forming and I was like, yeah, but I'm just getting into Night Ranger. I need time, I need time to catch up. For some reason, I remember I had a hard time finding Dawn Patrol, but this is before I knew where the the good used shops were. So I said I had a question for you, Josh, and I do. I remember. Okay, so I remember buying Midnight Madness early, say 1990. I found one, and it was a Canadian cassette. It was on MCA. Great album. I mean, there's not much more to say about the album itself. But then I remember a couple of years later, a good friend of mine said, I was at my aunt and uncle's place. My uncle had a bunch of cassette tapes up in his attic. He said, if you find anything you like up there, you can keep them. He said, I found a few things. He said, but I found this really weird Night Ranger tape. And at the time, we thought we had all the Night Ranger albums. And I said, it's something we didn't have. He said, no, it's Midnight Madness, but it looks like this. It's on CBS Records. It's on Epic.
It's either Canadian or England.
Yeah. So this is a Canadian cassette of Midnight Madness on Epic.
Yeah. So the first two records, all the albums were originally released in Canada. There are Canadian versions.
Yes.
But the first two records in England and in Canada are on the Epic label. So if you got the vinyl for like Dawn Patrol from Canada, for Dawn Patrol, it's got the Epic label. And there's actually two labels. There's a white label and a blue label.
Yeah, now, years later, I have seen a Dawn Patrol cassette that looks something like this too.
Yeah,
but I just figured that they were distributing Boardwalk in Canada.
No, so like in Japan, the first couple records are released, or maybe it's not. Maybe I think Dawn Patrol was released on Japanese Boardwalk, but eventually, I think Midnight Madness, maybe Seven Wishes, are released on CBS Sony. In Japan. But yeah, the Epic label is on those first couple records and the Canadian singles. So if you got the Canadian single of Dawn Patrol, it's got the Epic label, and those were always I always liked that Epic label. So those were a couple things I always sought out. Was those vinyl versions?
Yeah, I have the vinyl. I have a Canadian vinyl of Midnight Madness. It's got the blue label with it's got the Epic logo on it. But yeah, and I'm enough of a music minutia geek to know that that's not an international CBS serial number. It was one they only used in Canada. Usually they were for like Canada only releases that were signed like CBS Canada, but in some cases, if they licensed things from other territories. So that MCA Midnight Madness cassette that I got must have been a reissue. But I just remember, I knew that Dawn Patrol, I kind of knew the story with Boardwalk. They signed to Boardwalk. Boardwalk goes under. And then I just thought they'd re-signed to MCA and that was it. So we both puzzled over this for a long time. So thank you for finally clearing that up. So I'm like, did somebody go through all the trouble and do a really elaborate version of it? But I've seen this different times used. And I'm like, I don't get it, but that makes sense.
Yeah. I'd have to look. I'd have to look and see if there is a Boardwalk Canadian version. And then if once MCA picked them up, if that was
I have seen a reissue. I have seen a cassette. Cassettes for me are the easiest to spot because they look different right away. But I have seen a Canadian Dawn Patrol on MCA, and it's one of the blue. It looks a lot like the US one. Right. It's the blue reissue look to it.
I don't think Boardwalk did Canada. Like I said, I think it was all Epic, just because also the 45 there's no Boardwalk 45 from Canada. It's all Epic. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's it just was a lot of trial and error on my end, just buying the stuff and having it.
Yeah.
And you kind of put stuff together after a while. Like, okay, this is how that took place, and just using a little bit of logic and
That's right. Yeah. After, yeah, hopefully things come to you and go, okay, well, if the only place I ever see this is here, well, then there must have been, yeah. I wish I still had my old, my old Canadian Dawn Patrol tape. See, the old Canadian CBS in 1983 was the first year that they were white on the side. They were like a beige or cream color. Before that, they didn't have chromium dioxide. That was the big thing, right? Better sounding. But yeah, that's what the Dawn Patrol looks like, is this, but it's a slightly different color. And I never really thought about it before, but it's quite something that these guys, I know that they'd been in bands, Rubicon and the Aussie gig and all of that, and they finally have Night Ranger. They put the first album out, record label goes under. Usually that's it. That's usually the death knell for a band. It's usually just about impossible to regain that momentum. And do you think it was just, they got on the right tour, or that, the radio was supporting them, that another label saw it fit to pick them up? Like, that's usually a stumble that people can't recover from.
Well, so Boardwalk went under, and the record was selling with Don't Tell Me You Love Me. And there was some movement with Sing Me Away. So it goes under, and you got to remember this again, timeline is important. Quiet Riot and a lot of these groups are starting to kick off. And so now these labels are seeking these type of bands. So I think Bruce Cohn, who was their manager at the time, had some contacts with MCA, and basically they took that Boardwalk contract and honored it. They didn't really have to do a new contract. And they created, Bruce Cohn created that Camel Records.
Yeah.
And Night Ranger was off and away on MCA, and eventually they got Dawn Patrol pressed again and got it into the stores, because that was one thing that hurt them. Here they are touring. You got a single on MTV, and there's nowhere to buy the record.
Yeah.
So a lot of it's obviously them. They had a lot of momentum going with their single, Don't Tell Me You Love Me. They had a lot of momentum on the road, touring on their own. They were opening a lot back then for like 38 Special and ZZ Top, Sammy Hagar. And then their management to be able to, go to MCA and get that deal for them. And also what helped them was they had some of the songs already written for Midnight Madness. Sister Christian and Let Him Run were written before Dawn Patrol. They had those there.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Pat Glasser, who produced those first 3 records, he had told them, hey, you guys are going to be, after this record's released, you guys are going to be on the road a lot. You're not going to have time to write this second record. So let's leave some of these songs off, so you kind of have some for the next record. So Let Him Run was actually the first song Night Ranger ever wrote together. But Sister Christian was written before Dawn Patrol. Other than that, parts of Touch of Madness, were around before then. And as far as I know, the rest of the songs were written, later. But yes, that helped them as well. They didn't really have to, write a whole album. They already had a couple songs in the can. There's only 9 songs on that record, so you only had to come up with 7 more. They had 6. Chipping Away was written at the very end. They needed that one.
Yeah, and that's not a favorite of theirs. I think it's pretty good, but that's it. I also enjoyed the episode where you guys rated the songs with Eric. I thought that was fun. Actually, my buddy John, I mentioned him before. His cassette, I should have gotten him to send me a picture, and maybe you've seen this. His cassette of Midnight Madness is a US MCA cassette, and on the back of it, there's a misprint. It's spelled Kipping Away. There's no H on the back cover. Have you ever seen that?
No.
I'll have to find a picture of it. Maybe somebody put it up on Discogs, but yeah, because that's ever since then, that's how we'd sing that, Kipping Away.
Yeah, it's I think Kelly, when asked what's one song that, what's the one song from back then you don't get into or don't like, that was his song that he picked, just because it seemed rushed because it was at the very end.
You mentioned Kelly, and there's one thing about this band. I think the word overlooked comes up a lot, and I think people take them for granted. But Kelly and Jack are both great singers, and I've never heard anyone mention those guys as an influence, any singer, which is it's a shame, because they're both just so good at what they do. They don't sound the same, but yet they sound good together. Do you think it's because there's it's a band with two singers? Do you think they kind of get over? It's like if a band with two guitar players, people don't think of your favorite guitar players of all time. It's like, well, do I have to name them both, or why do you think that is? Because I mean, they're both just fine, great at what they do.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think when you think of that era and you think of singers, probably some of it is more of the charisma that goes with it. Roth and Hagar and Paul Stanley. People, when you mention maybe 80s rock, who do you like? I don't know. Maybe that's some of it. When Jack was in Rubicon, he didn't sing that often in that group. And I remember we talked on one of our episodes to Greg Eckler, who has since passed on. Greg was the drummer in Rubicon, and he sang, 4 songs probably on each record. And he had told us the reason why Jack didn't sing much is he just didn't have that top 40 voice. And so when he goes to Night Ranger and Kelly has the big hit with Sister Christian, well, Jack writes Sentimental Street and co-writes with Jeff Goodbye. And they basically want to let him sing those 2 tracks because they considered Kelly the ballad singer and had that top 40 voice. So when Jack got that hit with High Enough that he's singing, that was kind of his way of saying, hey, I can sing songs and because if you think about it, most of the top 10 hits were all Kelly.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, When You Close Your Eyes, they trade.
Yeah.
The most successful song that just Jack sang was probably 4 in the Morning, and that hit.
Well, that was a top 20. So that, and Don't Tell Me You Love Me was not Don't Tell Me You Love Me, but When You Close Your Eyes. Now, obviously, you have those hard rock staples, Don't Tell Me You Love Me and You Can Still Rock in America, but those weren't hits. They never, I don't think Don't Tell Me You Love Me cracked the top 40. If it did,
I think it hit 38. I think it just barely. And then Rock in America, I think it's 56. So I remember being surprised when I found that. I was like, that wasn't a top 40 hit. I actually remember hearing that.
Yeah. Really, when that was the first single, it was kind of a dud. It just didn't really go over. And then they released Sister Christian, and that is what propelled them. And that song was really what got them to, it pushed When You Close Your Eyes, that, followed right with that and rode their coattails. And it's what really gave them the chance to do Seven Wishes. If Sister Christian doesn't hit, you're probably not going to have that big push on Seven Wishes and get those other 3 singles. There for about 2 years. And Night Ranger owned MTV. I mean, go from
much music didn't play them that much, but I do remember they did play. I do remember seeing the videos from Seven Wishes a little bit, and for a very brief time, Secret of My Success, because I think that would it be fair to say that with Secret of My Success, were they putting all their eggs in that basket with Big Life, because They had 2 platinum albums, and Big Life only went gold. Do you think they expected that to be a lot bigger than it was?
Well, I think they expected it to be bigger than it was. I mean, you can't go wrong with, having a title track on a Michael J. Fox movie in 1987.
Yeah,
But from the get-go, um, the it it didn't turn out how they wanted. So, they got the title track for this movie, and when the previews came out, they didn't even use it. They were using I got Walking on Sunshine, I think is the song.
oh,
So they're using that. So now Night Ranger's like, well, hell, we're not even getting that push, and lawyers got involved and everything, and it wasn't it. It was a successful movie, but it didn't do as good as most Michael J. Fox's movies did. So that hurt it. Number two, what hurt it was there was a lot of musical change from 1985 with Seven Wishes
yeah,
to Big Life in 87. You have Bon Jovi and Poison, and you got to
yeah,
remember 1987, you're getting Guns N' Roses and Whitesnake and Aerosmith, to where it almost makes the music Night Ranger's doing almost seem ancient. And uh and that album wasn't like Midnight Madness or Dawn Patrol. It was different.
yeah.
Probably more of a slower record. Yeah, so just a combination of things on why that record just didn't work.
Yeah, if your first single doesn't do it, that's usually label pulls the support, and that's it. And
Mhm.
it's funny because it's one of those examples of a record that certifies gold that you still see in the delete bins. And as a matter of fact, it has a significance for me because it's the first CD I ever bought. I didn't buy it until the end of 1990 when we got a CD player in the house. But I remember buying this. I think it was like $6.99. There you go. And I didn't even quite realize, because I looked at that long box. Man, I wish I'd kept my long boxes. And I'm like, okay, so how does this work exactly? And I open the bottom end and flop, this falls out. And it's like, oh, that's cool. So I like the album. I always wondered because, and you're right. I have this theory about, the late 80s for bands that were not quite hard rock, which is Journey was sort of self-inflicted.
Mhm.
They went on hiatus, but bands like 38 Special and Toto and REO Speedwagon, even though I
Survivor.
think Survivor, yeah, great example. Even though all of those bands, I think, influenced the likes of Bon Jovi and Def Leppard, they seemed, dare I say, passe by the end of the 80s, and the albums they were putting out were just not hitting it, and it just wasn't their time anymore. And I bet you for Jack, it was such a vindication when Damn Yankees went platinum, and that must have been, okay, there's still,
Well,
and even though Damn Yankees was different than Night Ranger, it wasn't as keyboardy, but and talk about, you talk about singers, talk about a guy that can work with other singers, because there's no mistaking Jack and Kelly's harmonies, and there's no mistaking Jack and Tommy's harmonies. But what I always find interesting is that in Night Ranger, Jack sang the high parts, but in Damn Yankees, Tommy sang the high parts.
yeah,
Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But
yeah.
I was
But
glad when they got back together, and then I was glad when, the original band reunited for that brief period. What do you know about the gap, like between like 98 and then Hole in the Sun? Why was there such a long period between Night
well,
Ranger?
um, at that point, bands are just then starting to become legacy acts. Now, it took a while to get down to the Night Rangers of the world, but the Eagles in 95 and 96 and Kiss,
Yeah,
and it started to get to where, okay, it's okay to listen to these bands again. Grunge was ending. I can almost pinpoint it a little bit. In 1998, December, somewhere in there, close to Christmas, I saw Motley Crue at a theater in Dayton, Ohio. It was sold out, but it was a theater.
yeah,
Um,
like two,
that
3,000
Yeah,
people.
something like that.
Yeah,
And then that summer, they're playing Polaris Amphitheater, which is an outdoor shed that holds 18,000 people. So in between that time period, and the year before that, they played Vets Memorial in Columbus, which again is 30,000 people, maybe. So in that time frame, it started to become, it got to the 80s bands where it was the 70s bands that were starting to become Legacy X. And so that's part of it. It took a while for, oh yeah, I remember Night Ranger, and
Yeah.
that music's great. And, and they were still doing other things. You had the second half of 99 into early 2000, you had that third Damn Yankees record being recorded. And then throughout the 2000, 2005, you had a couple solo records by Kelly. You had Brad releasing a solo record. You had Jack releasing his first, and you had that. But the Night Ranger, they were still doing dates, but it was always like rib fests and stuff like that. It wasn't
like fly-ins.
Well, they were kind of always doing fly-ins, but it was just kind of weird. They'd be playing during the day at some rib fest. It just, I don't know, just didn't seem all
kind
that
of cheapened the.
Yeah, maybe some, but it was always cool to see them. But you never knew where they were going to be because they really didn't have a good website back then. And yeah, just like, I just don't think their heart was, I don't know. I don't know if their heart wasn't it. Just, hey, we're going to do Night Ranger, to, obviously make a living, but we're going to do some other things. And yeah, such a dead period. The only thing really around there was they did that re-record album where they re-recorded, it's called like Acoustics, Rarities, and something else. But that was probably just for them to use those recordings and films and stuff, so they got the money instead of Universal at the time. And you had Hole in the Sun, and that was not a very good experience, I don't think, recording wise. Obviously they were going through issues with Jeff being, I guess, fired in early 2007. Hole in the Sun, obviously, I mean, you talk to most Night Ranger fans, it's not on the top of their list of
probably my least favorite of their albums. But it's not that I think it's a bad album. It doesn't necessarily sound like Night Ranger. And one thing about it is that it sounds like they're struggling to, I don't know. The thing that I love about Night Ranger is that no matter what went into the recordings, everything sounds real. It just goes down easy. It goes down smooth. And Hole in the Sun is like a grit your teeth kind of listen and go, they're trying something. I mean, they came out of it because somewhere in California on, I'm like, that's Night Ranger. They sound like Night Ranger.
Well, Hole in the Sun, to me always it sounds like, okay, you bring two songs in, you bring two songs in, and we'll have a record. And if you look at the songwriting credits, I mean, there's a couple tracks,
and they're very clear about who wrote what. So it's almost like it's not very cohesive.
And then Jeff leaves, and you got Joel in there. And really, right around that time is when they got Doc McGee's management team, who managed Bon Jovi and Crew back in the 80s, and who was managing Kiss. That's where it kind of takes a direction that's a little bit different. It really started in 2009 when they hopped on the Journey tour.
Yeah.
And so they're playing arenas. That was the first time I remembered them playing arenas in forever. And I went and saw Journey because I wanted to go see Night Ranger in an arena setting. And you had that in 2009. At the end, they started playing arenas with REO and Styx. And then 2010, you had Christian leaving, Eric Levy joining, and I think kind of maybe some of those dates, I don't know if it rejuvenated them, But then when they got to recording somewhere in California, uh, they were all together writing it together. So I think that helped. And um, yeah, then you got that album coming out in 2011, and you're like, holy shit, this is,
Yeah.
has that classic Night Ranger sound. And it's been a great decade, since that's been out.
And they've been fairly like, 3-4 years or so. They haven't been like some of these bands that just, why haven't they put a new album out in 20 plus years? So yeah, I'm glad that they keep putting out, new music. I do my best to give it a shout out when it does come out. That's interesting. I didn't know most of what what you were just saying, which brings me to the fact this is why Night Ranger fans, you need to follow Fans in Motion. So where did the idea come to do a Night Ranger podcast? Because like you said, you're at 100 episodes and you wonder how you got there. This isn't a band with a ton of, there's drama, but there's not a lot of highly publicized stuff. You really got to be almost on the inside to know what's going on. Where did the idea come from to commit to doing this? And you seem to have like a core group that does it, and you switch out co-hosts, and
well, what it was is I was like, how can I get all these ladies that are chasing me? How can I get them away from me? I'll start a Night Ranger. I'll start a podcast. That'll work. So it really starts. I collect Kiss vinyl as well, and
don't we all?
yeah. So a few years. It's probably been 5 years now, something like that. Kiss released, they originally released it in 2014. They released this road case that contained all the Kiss records and all that stuff. And there was some exclusive in there. And basically I did the math. Hey, I can buy this case and sell everything in it, and I'll have, enough left over where I can keep the case and not owe anything. So I ended up buying like 20 some of these. Well, I was putting the stuff on a Kiss site on Facebook, I think, selling some of the stuff, and a gentleman, I use that word loosely, reached out to me named Brent, and wanted to look at making a trade. So I think we were talking on the phone, and we kind of negotiated that trade, and just asked me what else do I like, and I mentioned Night Ranger, and he's like, really? And he mentioned about having an original Boardwalk record. So I told him, well, you have the first pressing or a second pressing of that Boardwalk record, because there's two pressings. And I told him to flip it over. I actually got the here. So if your Night Ranger Boardwalk does not have the Bruce Cone on the back, that is the first pressing.
Okay, because mine does.
So right there.
So this is actually this is an RCA music service version.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So so those are the other ones you can have. You can have RCA or Columbia Records.
House. Yeah.
But here's another Boardwalk, like you just showed, but there's the Bruce Cone management. So that's the second pressing. So that's where you get into some of this there's not a lot to collect. Well, you got those.
Yeah.
You got the Columbia House and the RCA pressings, and then it went to MCA. Them repressing it on MCA. But so yeah, we were kind of amazed. Oh, there's other Night Ranger fans out there. I think a lot of people who's are big Night Ranger fans think they're the only ones. And he was kind of impressed with my knowledge of, oh, this guy knows, his Night Ranger vinyl. And I don't know. I think he said something about, we should start a Night Ranger page or something like that. This would have been like 2019, I think. And I just, I'm not going to do that. I got other things to do. And then when the pandemic hit,
right,
I think it was early April, he sent me a link to this other Night Ranger fan page that was out there. And I went to it, and I was just like, I can do better than this. So I just created it, and brought Brent on, helped me out with it. And he's the one that came up with the name Fans in Motion. And, I wanted to do I wanted to attach a podcast to it. So we created on Facebook, and the podcast, I had a couple of people that I was thinking of, and he had a friend of his and they're a little bit older. They saw Night Ranger on that first Dawn Patrol tour opening for Kiss. And he's like my best friend. He's a really good guy and, would be really good on the podcast. So I kind of, took his word on that. And then we started the podcast. I think the first episode was right at the end of May of 2020. And it was myself, Brent, and Andy. So we're like the core three guys from the beginning. And yeah, with the podcast, I'd never done a podcast before. So I reached out to someone I knew who had one and like, hey, I'll give you a couple $100, give me a couple hours. I want you to tell me everything that worked, everything that didn't work. So I don't have to waste my time doing all that. And yeah, that's how it all began. And never would I realize I'd end up where I'm at doing this.
Well, yeah, you've interviewed band members, you've interviewed road managers, you've interviewed musicians that know the guys.
Mhm.
You've come a long way. I mean, like I was kind of looking, okay, this episode is number this, that's number that. I'm like, yeah, it's, you guys have you've created, like when I started my channel in 2014, there were a lot of great music channels on YouTube, but nobody was talking about Y&T. Nobody was talking about Coney Hatch. Nobody, so like you, I perceived the deficit. I'm like, there's got to be somebody out there that's into this stuff.
Yep.
And I've never, I never imagined it would last as long as it did. But yeah, there's people out there that appreciate these bands that were big, but they weren't quite, they're like the second tier, but that doesn't make the music any less great. You mentioned Columbia House, and I have to bring this up because anybody that knows anything about me, I mean, I wrote a book about it. I'm a huge 8-track collector for albums that I liked. And I'm wondering, and I think you do, you've got, seems to me in the background, I've seen what looks like a Columbia House slipcase. Maybe not that background, but I know some of the episodes I could see what looks like a Columbia House slipcase. Like he must have one of the 8-tracks at least. I
got this sitting around, which is actually probably the easiest one to get.
Yeah, I would say so. I got these. These are I need Dawn Patrol, but that seems to be the hardest one to find, which usually the ones that are closer to 82 are the easier ones.
Yes. That's why it's weird that 85.
It's probably because of the whole boardwalk thing and not as many were pressed. I do know this, that like all the Columbia House ones look the same on the side. I do know this, I've seen it. The Dawn Patrol 8-track has the band name and the title reversed. So it's got Dawn Patrol in big words and Night Ranger in little. So that's one thing you need to look for. But yeah. And the other thing is, talking about the 8-tracks that only came out through the record clubs. It's entirely possible that Big Life might exist on 8-track. We just haven't seen it yet. I'm constantly surprised by what did come out on 8-track and what didn't. And we're talking about very, very small pressings. But yeah, I was wondering, I figured you must have at least one of the Night Ranger 8-tracks with all the good memories.
Yeah, and I don't know if I think I have Dawn Patrol. Maybe I don't have Midnight Madness. I don't know. Or maybe I got them all. I'd have to look.
If you got Dawn Patrol, that's the hardest one. Yeah, it's almost in complete reverse order. It's easier to get 7 wishes.
Yes, 7 wishes
than the older ones. So yeah, and that's something else that I always get a kick out of people. Wait a minute, you got the what on 8-track? The Final Countdown by Europe? Yes. It's these things were made, and I can't imagine anybody cruising around listening to, because most people were buying cassettes at that point. That's one of the reasons I'm kind of fascinated by them. Yeah. You must have some really cool like Night Ranger collectibles. What are some of your holy grails that you've been able to get a hold of?
Well, I mean, I want to go back to where I got them sitting here, and I got a couple of things I know you'll like. Doing these interviews, when we did the Kelly Kagi interview, I was talking about his social media, and he's like, well, why don't you just help me with it? And I'm like, dude, you're not going to have to ask me twice. And so I started helping with Kelly's, and then they liked what I was doing. So now I do all of Night Ranger's social media and all of the members, Jack and Kelly and um, Brad, and I help Eric sometimes. Eric's really good at doing his. Um, but yeah, so and I'll and some of the Night Ranger stuff when the show goes on sale, that's obviously just me. But I think like with Brad, the last post that we did was a screenshot of him and Ronnie James Dio.
Yeah.
And that was just me sending that screenshot to Brad and being like, hey, let's do something with this today. And so we kind of just, he'll send me something and I'll put it together and then I'll do all the hashtags and post them there for
That's
him or he's, Brad's very hands-on with LinkedIn. So if he does something on LinkedIn, he'll get with me and I'll just take it from LinkedIn and put it on his Instagram and his Facebook. But yeah, just to be from, like I said, starting this podcast to where like me and Eric are really good friends. Me and Kelly are really good friends. Just yesterday I exchanged a few texts with Jack and I'm actually helping them at the end of February on a couple shows. Yeah, it's just weird that
that's so cool. Like when you put the work into it and they can obviously see that it's a professional product that you put out and you're like, okay, well, this guy knows our music. He knows what fans would want. So yeah, wow, that's really cool, man. That is that.
Well,
that's like, yeah, those are those pinch me moments, right?
Definitely. Like, so if you like Eric just texted earlier a couple songs that he recorded back in the day for me to listen to. But yeah, it's just like I said, it's crazy to where these guys that were on your records and now you're going to dinner with them sometimes on the road, and I always try to go out to the shows that they're around here, and every now and then if they'll need extra help, hey, can you come down and and help us get some vehicles or whatever. I've been around and long enough to where they trust me, and I generally don't like people in the first place, so I don't really go all fanboy on them and stuff like that, and I was never really like that to begin with. I never was big into the autographs and all that stuff, but yeah, so that's where it's kind of great with the podcast is we have that, and I say we because Brent has designed some of their guitar picks, so he kind of took like Eric's name and Carrie's name and made them into a Night Ranger logo. And so
I love that looks so cool when he takes names. And
I might have one somewhere sitting here. I don't know, maybe I do, maybe I don't. I got a shit ton of picks, but obviously I'm not going to find the one that I need off the top of my head. And then Andy, he's he helps out. I've brought him on to help out a little bit, and so he's having dinner with Brad one night with us, and so it's just like a dream come true kind of thing. And but it helps with the podcast too, because we can we got a little bit of an insider view. Obviously you got that line between privacy and what you can and say and everything, but yeah, it's just if you listen to the first podcast, I'm like, no, those guys will never even pay attention to this. And now it's I'm usually hearing from one of the guys at least once every other day, and you'll wake up in the morning and Jack Blades, like what's going on there, and yeah, just living the life. And so yeah, that's really how it, because of the podcast. And just recently we brought on a couple more hosts, Robin and Lisa, and yeah, it just keeps growing. And I appreciate everybody out there listening. Now, you were talking about some collectible stuff. Look at this. That is the second Rubicon record on cassette.
I've only ever seen. I have a funny story about that, the first Rubicon record, real quick. Wow.
It's
That's a
Canadian.
Canadian one. Okay.
Yeah.
I remember about 95. I was in the used record store and there were like literally 50-cent records. Okay. They were pretty beaten up. I came across that first Rubicon record and all I knew about them was that Jack and Brad, I didn't know Kelly had been with them, but on that first record, I knew Jack and Brad were in the band. I knew they had a top 40 single. I'd never heard it. And the cover looks kind of cool. Like it looks kind of a rocky looking cover. And I remember taking it home and putting it on the turntable and go, this does not sound like Night Ranger at all. And then I realized that it was essentially, was it Jerry Martini from Sly and the Family Stone? So I'm like, okay, that makes a lot of sense now. And I'm like, how did Dawn Patrol come out of those? Wow. Like it's pretty amazing, right?
So you had Jerry Martini from Sly and the Family Stone. You had Max Haskett. You had like a horn section. There was 3 horn players in the band. Max Haskett was with like Cold Blood and the Lydia Pence. Dennis Marcelino came from the Elvin Bishop group. So you had some pedigree there. And yeah, I mean, and Jack's playing is totally different. I mean,
he's slapping bass. I just read a thing recently with Rob Trujillo from Metallica that said that he saw them in concert and Jack Blades is slapping the bass. And I'm like, what? But then I got thinking about it. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And it's weird because when Jack's in Night Ranger, he plays with a pick and he does some cool, like he has some cool bass lines, but there's no slap bass except Secret of My Success, which I think is a little slap bass part.
Like on Rubicon, I mean, he is, he's just channeling like Larry Graham on there. And you don't, I mean, with Jack and Night Ranger, a lot of times the bass is lower in the mix. So you don't get to hear. I mean, probably the one that's most you can hear just because it's just him is the beginning of I Will Follow You. That's just him playing bass.
I Need a Woman. Or
Yep. And then coming out of the guitar solo of Rumors in the Air is his bass. So it's just really the mix, but yeah, his go to YouTube and just click on like Rubicon Cow Jam or search that and you'll see like he does a bass solo and all this other stuff. This here for your 8-track viewing pleasure.
Yeah, there it is.
There's the first this might be Canadian too. Maybe not.
They were on 20th Century. Is that was the label?
The case is Canadian.
TRT. That's that. I think they were just a distributor. I think they were on 20th Century Records, which was I think it was sort of in the Casablanca stable
20th Century Fox Records.
Yeah.
So Rubicon on the 8-track. But like I said, I showed you the Dawn Patrol vinyl where you have those two Bruce Cohn man.
Yeah.
And how do how did I determine one's before the other? Well, all the promo versions, which are the first ones off the press out to radio stations, none of those have Bruce Cohn management.
Right.
And you would think probably either one of two things happened. Either they just forgot to put it on there or just not too long after that, Bruce Cohn became their manager.
Yeah.
And then on the next pressings, they added. So a lot of logic. Do I know for a fact? No, but if you just put all those
you
together,
put things together. Yeah. Now here's a question about Dawn Patrol. And I thought I read this somewhere, but you would know. Are there versions of Dawn Patrol where they're just called Ranger? Or is that a urban legend?
I would say that I've told people it's one of two things. It's either an urban legend, which I think it is, or they destroyed every single one, which is hard to do, right?
Yeah. Hard to get your hands on every single one.
Correct, because I mean, if anybody that knows, collects like Kiss, there's just all kinds of stuff. And Boardwalk is basically just a offshoot of Casablanca Records.
Right. It was Neil Bogart.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
their quality control is not the best, probably. So I don't think it ever existed because I've been collecting, like I said, 40 years. I've been on eBay since the very beginning. There is very little that I've never seen.
Yeah.
And eventually one's got to turn up.
If they
Someone,
exist. Yeah.
yeah, someone had said that Kevin Russell of 707 had one, and that was the best lead because 707 was on was on Boardwalk as well.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
and I'm friends with Kevin, and I reached out to him, and he said that he don't have one. So I think it was someone in the band had said that. And then someone said that they took stickers and put like the Night Ranger logo sticker over it. Well, again, that would mean 10,000 of them went out.
Yeah.
So there's still got to be, and you could be able to tell if there's a sticker on there. Then you got to reseal them.
Or you could tell if a sticker had been taken off, and it would have ripped the whole.
So I think, as in anything, I think you need a good story to tell on stage. It's showbiz. And when the legend becomes fact, you print the legend. So it's just good banter to have out there.
It's fun.
This is the ad, because the story is they are recording Dawn Patrol, the Ranger. They're in the studio, and one of them opens the magazine up and go, "Oh shit, look at this!" And I'm pretty sure this is what they would have seen.
Yes, I saw the episode where you showed that off, and I couldn't even find that record on Discogs. So that got me wondering, like, well, how big was this band, the Rangers, that they had to change their name?
Well, if you go listen to, I tracked down one of the guys. Now, there's three of them. One's passed away. I tracked one down. It took me a while, and I interviewed him. We got him on one of the episodes, and he never knew anything about Night Ranger and changing the name. But it's an interesting story. That record. The single came out. You can find the single, but and his name is Brett Gilmore. And I was talking to him like, I can't find that record anywhere. He goes, I know there's stuff out. Like, he goes, I know I probably own some stuff. And he mailed me a sealed cassette copy of it. So did it ever go to sale? I don't know. But listen to that episode. You can just hear, it's a great story of show business because they came so close to making it. And just never did. But you'll get stories of drugs, their management, that they sign on to is also doing drugs on the, selling drugs on the side. And they were a country kind of, a little bit of bluegrass. And they had one of the legendary guys in their band that knew Elvis. So back in the 70s, while they're going through Memphis, he stopped and they stopped. And the guy, that they knew Elvis, they all were able to go into Graceland, and they all sang gospel with Elvis. Wow. And so there's a lot of good stories. So you want to hear just just music in general, just some great stories, go find that episode with the original Ranger, Brett Gilmore. But yeah, that Dawn Patrol record I don't think exists.
Yeah, it makes sense. So cool. Well, I don't really have any other questions other than I really enjoyed our conversation, and it's had me going back and listening to a lot of the Night Ranger albums. I really need to acquaint myself with the latter day ones a little bit more. I picked them up as they came out, but I really need to go back there and get those so that I know them as well as say the first five.
Let's do one more thing here because I want to see if you had the Canadian version of this. So obviously this record.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird because it's the only place where the album is called The Big Life, not just Big
Life. Actually, I've got another example where it's called that. I've got this is a US cassette, and on the side, it says Big Life.
Yep.
But on the cassette itself, it says The Big Life.
All right. So you got that. Yeah. But you see this album cover here. See all the stuff here on the side and everything like that, right?
Yeah.
Well, and another thing, if you look, this label says The Big Life, then Night Ranger.
Yeah.
You can get the same copy right? And now look at this. It says Night Ranger, and then underneath it, the Big Life. So even the labels are different because
Wow.
MCA had two pressing companies,
Yes.
and um, and so obviously quality control not that big. So you'll get that if you look at the Seven Wishes uh, and Midnight Madness, the camel logo, depending on what pressing changes, and also Seven Wishes, you can kind of tell when that was pressed by if you have the MCA rainbow label or if you have a
Yes.
Seven Wishes with this camel label, because in early '86 they switched over to that camel label. So if you have a Seven Wishes with that camel label, well, it's was printed probably early '86 or after. If you got the MCA rainbow, it's late '85 or before. But here now, remember how I showed you that cover that had all the stuff in the background?
Yeah.
Look at this cover. A little bit more.
Okay.
All right.
Not as
So
busy.
correct. So if in the US, if you went to the store, you're getting the one with the busy stuff in the background.
Right.
If you get it from a CRC, Columbia Records Club, or RCA, which became BMG, you're going to get the one without all the stuff going on in the background. And if you were in Canada, this is actually a Canadian copy. So Canada was the same.
So I don't have it right in front of me, but my Big Life record is a Canadian Columbia House
Okay.
pressing. So I'm going to have to look at that. And my Seven Wishes is a US RCA version. So I got to check that out too. That's cool.
Yeah. And also, if you look at the time, all the US copies are using that camel label, but
Yeah.
Canada is still using the
Just the rainbow
yep.
MCA.
So just a little bit of difference there. That's the laser disc from Japan.
I was
In
going to
Motion.
say, does it live in Japan come out on vinyl?
So what you got is that greatest hits and live in Japan were released to basically fulfill the contract.
Yes.
So over in Japan, they released Japan in Motion on Laserdisc and VHS, and they just took the audio and released it as live in Japan.
Live in Japan. Yeah, I remember being surprised when I came across that in a store because I had no idea it was coming out. I bought it right away. Is that all it is? Yeah, that's that show.
Yeah, I just like it because I love that album cover, and
yeah,
it basically doubles as vinyl.
Well, I've got a soft spot for Man in Motion. I actually I've been on the contrarian several times, and I argued for Man in Motion as my favorite, just because I don't know. I dug that album. I know that MCA just threw it out, but like I said before, some of these bands it wasn't their time anymore. But MCA is notorious for not just Night Ranger, but Kansas and Dennis DeYoung and Little River Band. Whatever albums they put out, they hit the delete bins within months.
Yeah. They didn't have a good rock success record with most acts. And I always thought it funny too when they released Man in Motion, the thing they kept saying in all the advertisements is guitars are back, and someone on the page, that's the great thing about Fans of Motion on Facebook, because we have so many people posting cool stuff, and someone took their VHS that they taped the debut of Night Ranger, I Did It for Love, back in '88, and put it on digital so everybody could see it. And I don't know if it's Martha Quinn or someone, but they're like, Night Ranger's new single coming up, and their guitars are back for them, and blah 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 blah, and then they jump into the world premiere of it. Yes,
which is the only cassette single I have that looks like this. That's in an actual case.
Yep.
Somebody sent me this. It's like I have never seen a cassette single like that before.
And the first thing you see in the video is Jeff playing keyboards, so it's like guitars are back, but here's a new video with the first thing you see is Jeff playing keyboards. But I
mean, that's a pretty guitar oriented album, but not that song. and
No.
not Restless Kind? Or
Well, here's the thing: when they submitted that record originally had a release date of June,
okay,
and there's some publicity stuff out there that states that when they submitted it, it was only nine tracks. It did not have Restless Kind, and it did not have I Did It for Love. And MCA told them we got to have a ballad. So they went back, wrote Restless Kind, recorded it, submitted it. Now you got 10 songs. Our MCA did not want Restless Kind. So then I think Jack flew to England with Russ Ballard, and basically they took Russ Ballard's track and recorded it, which MCA
became the lead
accepted.
single.
Yes. So originally Man in Motion was only going to have nine tracks, and
which is odd for 1988.
Yeah,
because by then a lot of albums were at least 10 songs, maybe 12.
Well, Midnight Madness had 9. I mean, yeah, so it was still in the,
well, Big Life had 9.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Now there is a 10th song that was recorded for that record. Not a lot of stuff in the vaults on Night Ranger, but you do have. It was released on maybe The Secret of My Success.
Oh, Girls All Like It.
Correct.
Yeah, that's a good song. I used to have a digital copy of that.
And Wild and Innocent Youth, which was for the Out of Bounds.
Yes. Yes, I remember. I've never heard it, but the reason I know that song exists is because I used to have a circus magazine, and they would have lyrics for some song, and that was one of them. And it's funny that Out of Bounds soundtrack, there's 4 songs by bands that I like that are associated with that. So there's Wild Innocent Youth. Apparently, Motley Crue's song Nona was originally supposed to be a full song. It's just it's mostly an instrumental, but that was supposed to be for Out of Bounds. Bon Jovi actually have a song called Out of Bounds, which ended up on their box set. And then Y&T's song Wild If I Want It, which is I think John Nyman wrote that. It didn't end up on
the record.
It ended up on one of the Y&T's Unearthed albums. But so yeah, these 4 songs from this little known obscure. The only reason I know about it is because any of these bands that talk about a song with the Out of Bounds soundtrack.
Yeah. So you can find, obviously those on YouTube. Wild Innocent Youth was only released as a 12-inch single. So you can find that out there. And then I guess the only other thing from the 80s that's kind of rare is Interstate Love Affair
from Teachers.
On the Teachers.
It's a different mix.
It's a totally different mix. And if you know Interstate, I always want to say Interstate Love Song, but
Love Song,
Interstate Love Affair from 7 Wishes, and you know it pretty good in your head. When you hear that Teacher's version, you will hear the differences. I think I kind of like it better. I think it's a little bit heavier and a little bit rawer, but
it's like Sammy Hagar heavy metal. Like the version that's on the heavy metal soundtrack is different than the version that's on Standing Hampton.
Yeah, well, same thing with Mob Rules with Black Sabbath.
Yeah,
different versions as well. So yeah, I don't know how the hell we got onto that one, but hey.
No, it's fun. No, listen, that's one of the reasons I started this channel. So, so Josh, what have we got coming up? What have you got coming up for Fans in Motion? Anything big or that you can talk about? Or
yeah, I mean, we just recorded. It'll actually probably be released tomorrow, and I don't know when you're releasing this, so it'll probably already be out. But we had. First of all, if you're listening, go to Facebook, type in Fans in Motion Night Ranger, click join. That's where everything's happening. We have so many people on there, that are, if Night Ranger's playing live, there's someone there that will post photos and stuff. So you always know what they're doing. I posted on there last week, hey, if you got a question for Eric Levy, the current keyboardist for Night Ranger, post them in the comments here, and I'm going to, get on the horn with him and record, and I'll read them. And God, we did like 3 hours worth, so I'll probably break it up, but that's going to be coming out there. We got another interview. It's tied to the Night Ranger summer tour this year with Brett Michaels and Jefferson Starship. So I got someone in line, it's involved with that to jump on. every other week we kind of do it like a Night Ranger news. We call it news notes and minutia, where we just basically talk about what's happening out there new in the Night Ranger world, the new tour dates that have been announced. I'll show off, some of these Night Rangers collectibles and stuff. And then Brent, he'll go through and he'll highlight some of the cool posts that members have made. People on there will just post all kinds of cool stuff. There's a girl on there, Melissa. She has Jack's pants from Sentimental Street video, and that he wore live because she went to the recording. I think it was of one of the Big Life videos. And at the end, they threw out some stuff, and Jack threw out, those old Seven Wishes pants.
Must have been Hearts Away, maybe, because that was
yes.
I think
I think that was it. And I think she was also at the Sentimental Street or 4 a.m. Video shoot as well. But you get good information because the Bumblebee outfit that Brad wore during Seven Wishes, we found where the pants are. They're in Hard Rock out in Tokyo, but the shirt's not there. And she was able to chime in. Yeah, when they threw out, those pants from the video, Brad threw out the yellow Bumblebee shirt. So someone out there has got it, and God knows where it's at. But so you get stuff like that, or you get, people posting their Night Ranger stories. So definitely just go to Facebook, join there, and join the Night Ranger community, man. It's the greatest thing in the world.
It's a very cool site. And, even if you just think I think I know a couple other songs. This is a great music community. And I highly recommend it. Fans in Motion. Josh, thank you very much for this. This has been great. It just makes me want to go back and listen to Night Ranger and look at label records. So thanks for that. Everybody follow Man in Motion on all the socials, especially the Facebook. And listen, this has been a great conversation. Hoping they come to my area somewhere close so I can actually see them in concert. But thanks for watching this episode of Tim's Vinyl Confessions.